Hello, everybody. We are back right at 10:30 too. Wow.
Oh
Started it
yeah,
on the dot. How you doing, Jonathan?
I am actually doing quite well. It's been an exciting week. Happy end of month to everybody out there,
The end of month.
right? End of quarter if you're following fiscal, all those other great things. But no, really, just having a good time and keeping up all the hacks. How about that?
Keeping up all the hacks. Yeah, lots of hacks to keep up on this week. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Yeah, everything's going well over here too. We had two really beautiful days this week in Seattle. Like really gorgeous days, and so I feel like I finally got real sun. um and the vitamin D started to return to my body, so I've been feeling a little bit better about everything. But welcome to GPS Live for the week of March 22nd. This is our regular weekly news recap show where Jonathan and I go through interesting stories that we've found for the week, and relay them to you, our wonderful viewers. So, if you are tuning in live right now, please go ahead, drop us a comment, let us know where you're coming in from. We love to see the interaction with the stream and the conversation that starts around the things that we're talking about. We love bringing you guys into the conversation when we can. So if you have a thought about something that we're saying, go ahead and drop it in there. And if you are watching this on demand, thank you so much for your time. We still care about your comments. We still care about your opinions. One thing that we really do we actually do this after the show is that we'll sit down and we'll talk about comments that we got and see if there's anything that we want to look into for the next week, like conversation topics, or if it spurred anything. We've even gotten a few blog ideas out of this, so you may be the inspiration for some other content that we will put out. But before we get started with any of our stories, especially for this week, we've got some good ones that this will apply to probably. Anything that Jonathan and I say is our own opinion, is not expressly the opinion of GuidePoint Security. We are not like official opinion representatives. We're just two guys talking about cybersecurity. And the things that we find interesting for the week. If you want official opinions, then you should probably head to guidepointsecurity.com and take a look at our blog. Take a look at the resources that we put out. Take a look at the stuff that the Grit team puts out, GuidePoint Research and Intelligence. They are killing it with some of the research that they're doing, including a very interesting article that we got up earlier this week about ransomware as a service and some changes that are happening there. But we can talk about that a little bit more at the end. Jonathan, what have we got going today? This first story, I think, is right up your alley.
Yeah, this is something that I absolutely love. I'm a big fan of responsible disclosure. I'm a big fan of bug bounties. Well, this is the number one event every year when it comes to getting paid for hacking stuff, and that is Pwn to Own. And so Pwn to Own, their Vancouver varietal, just finished up. And we're talking over $1.1 million awarded to 29 different O days, right? And that is so cool because Pwn to Own focuses on some of the biggest targets on the internet. I'm not talking about just individual pieces of software. We're talking about operating systems, browsers, Microsoft Office,
Yep.
even cars, right? So these are all well within being targeted by these different groups. And this is one of the best ways to get some of these bugs off the market, or at least off the black market, into the hands of the developers, get it fixed, and kind of get paid along the way.
Yeah, so this actually falls under, I would say, the good news category of things that we usually talk about, right? These are the kinds of things that we love to see. Bug bounties have obviously been around for quite a while. One of the things that I love, though, about Pwn to Own specifically is the fact that there's a strict timeline put on it when someone goes into Pwn to Own. So we're all probably, if you're watching this and you're in a cybersecurity community, you're probably familiar with the term responsible disclosure, right? So if you're a researcher and you find a vulnerability in something, there's an entire process that you have to go through to ethically disclose that vulnerability to the manufacturer of whatever software or hardware you found it in, so that they have a chance to try and fix it before you make anything that you found public. Because once you make it public, right, you don't even have to make your code public. Just someone knowing the vulnerability is out there, it's going to get cracked overnight. So that responsible disclosure process is incredibly important within the cybersecurity community. But every once in a while, it breaks down, right? And so someone will find a vulnerability that they're like, hey, this is a huge vulnerability that I found in XYZ. And the developer or the manufacturer might go, hey, yep, you know what? That's out of scope. Sorry, you're not going to get a bug bounty for it. And also, like, we don't view this as a high priority thing that's functioning as intended, even if it is causing a problem. So what Pwn to Own specifically has is, I think, like a 30-day window for anything.
They do offer 90 days to
90
the
days.
developer after it's been fully disclosed as part of the competition.
Great. So yeah, so that is I don't know where I got 30 days from. Oh, you know what it was? My brain saw the 29 0 days discovered.
Oh yes, they skipped the 0 and just went into that.
Yeah, exactly. It went right in there. So the 90 days, I love that about Pwn to Own, because they find some critical vulnerabilities, and putting a hard set on, like, if you want to participate in Pwn to Own, if you as a company want to participate in Pwn to Own and have your stuff looked at by these, you know, top tier experts in the field of, like, of ethical hacking, right? And essentially, you know, for not for free, but you're not paying for a red team to go through this. You're putting up a prize, right? They're agreeing to say, yeah, anything that you find, if we don't have it fixed within 90 days, it can go out to the public, which is insane.
So some of the targets that we saw specific to this year, like I said, were Windows 11. We saw Ubuntu desktop. Both VMware and Oracle virtualization platforms were part of the targets. We saw Safari, Chrome, and Edge, and even Tesla Model 3 was all part of this bit of shenanigans. So, you know, I wanted to kind of highlight some of the things that are happening here. First off, if you've ever participated in Pwn to Own, we'd love to hear about your experience there. Or if you're a big fan of, you know, vulnerability disclosure, responsible disclosure, and bug bounty programs, hit us up in the chat. But some of the things that we saw,
I'd also be interested to know, even if you haven't participated, if you know of a vulnerability that's like your favorite vulnerability that you've heard about from Pwn to Own, drop that in there, because I love going. Some people find the most niche things in there, and I love going and reading about those. So let us know.
CVE of the year. So what's happening right here is we're talking about different types of vulnerabilities. One of the most popular ones that we're seeing out there is called an RCE, or remote code execution. What this means is that we can get code successfully running on a target without actually having full control over that target. In this case, Safari had a number of different vulnerabilities that were able to bypass a lot of the security mechanisms. One of the more complex vulnerabilities that was demonstrated was on that Tesla Model 3, where a group of individuals were able to hack into the ECU of the vehicle. That's the the electrical control unit. This is the brains of the car, over what's called a CAN bus. This is like a special wiring network that runs throughout a car. Now, remember, cars today are computers. Whether they have an engine or an electric motor, they have a lot of little computers in them, and they have to talk to each other. And so when you can tap into that network that's running on the car, kind of like an Ethernet network in your office or home, you can see all kinds of things flying by, intercept it, dump stuff back on that network. And they were luckily enough to be able to, trigger some exploits in the car and get some money out of it.
You know, an interesting thing, specifically with because we've been talking about vehicles and automotive manufacturing actually over the last couple weeks. We've had stories that had to deal with this. In fact, over a couple months, we've seen a lot of this. It's always fun to kind of like, now that we've been doing this show for a while, to like watch the news trends of like everyone's talking about cars now. Right, specifically when it comes to the security of the fact that these cars are increasingly connected. In fact, there are some new cars now that you can't buy without agreeing to having an internet connection to the car, so that the manufacturer can pull data from it. if there was ever a reason to build a really nice looking Faraday cage more than there is right now, I don't know what it is, but just put a Faraday cage around your car whenever you're when you're not driving it. When it comes to the CAN bus and all of the things that are flying across that, because these cars are increasingly connected, and because the monitoring tools for these cars is directly connected to the car's actual inbuilt computer, you can now wirelessly, right? If there's a CAN bus flaw and something in there, you can now wirelessly get into that. And it actually kind of goes into a little bit something that Pascal Ackerman, one of our experts here at GuidePoint Security and a researcher, he discovered some flaws with OT monitoring software, where he was able to intercept messages from the actual monitoring from the actual monitors themselves and change the data on the way to the display, so that you could trick people into thinking that something's overheating when it's not, something's over pressure when it's not. When you think about the number of systems that are all connected into that car's computer, and then through that CAN bus system, the signals that get sent out there, and then the fact that you can wirelessly influence that now, that opens up all kinds of possibilities for being able to, tell every car on the road within a certain area, hey, your oil pressure's off, right? Like cause massive traffic jams. Like when you start looking at something like cyber warfare, right? And influencing like people's patterns of life, being able to influence cars themselves across a universal system like that is pretty scary. So finding something like that in Pwn to Own is crazy. That was a long circuitous thing. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine, right? Pwn to Own targets a variety of different things. It just so happens that because cars are so heavily involved now in being part of an embedded computer system, that Pwn to Own actually even hosts one of their 3 different types of contests at the Tokyo Automotive Show, and
Yeah.
that allows hackers to take advantage of different variety of vehicles that are now available to them without necessarily having to own one themselves, and find all different types of vulnerabilities, tap into the wires, figure out what's going on, and get that information disclosed and win a prize for themselves. So it's definitely really cool stuff. And hacking hardware, I'd say, isn't the only thing that we have on today's show. In fact,
It is not.
you actually found this really cool story that I
Yeah.
know a lot of our viewers are going to be interested in. So tell me about hacking something that's not a car, but a little bit more than that.
Yeah, speaking of the ethical hacking capabilities of things, what we're going to talk about now is a company called Dormakaba and their SafLok product. So in 2022, so that was 2 years ago now, at Black Hat and DEF CON, which puts us at maybe closer to a year and a half ago. There was a private event in which a bunch of researchers were invited into a hotel room and told, hack absolutely anything that you can. And one pair of researchers, whose names are, I've got them right here at the top of this article,
Ian Carroll,
Ian
Leonard Watt.
Carroll and Lennart Wouters.
Yes.
They decided to focus on the door lock for the hotel itself. And what
Very
they found,
creative of the in this room concept.
yeah, they definitely, they got right to the edge there. But they decided to focus on the door lock for the room itself. And what they discovered is that these SafLok door locks were using a fairly common RFID system called MyFair, which is known to have a lot of vulnerabilities. And what they did is they were able to put together a system for essentially being able to read any hotel key card, whether it is expired, so you checked out this morning and you dropped it in the key card drop box, being able to grab one of those keys, read it, and then create a master key combo so that they can open any SafLok lock basically around the world. And the numbers on that are pretty staggering. The SafLok system is installed on 3 million doors worldwide inside 13,000 properties in 131 countries. So this is an incredibly large swath of vulnerable devices. Absolutely incredible that they were able to find this.
It is actually really cool. So the concept of RFID hacking, or even stuff like NFC hacking, has been around for a couple of years now, actually quite a few years. And we're starting to see hotels move away from that old mag stripe system to that kind of tap system, similar to what we're seeing in our credit cards. And so
Right.
MyFair Classic is just one of those many technologies. And the crazy thing too, at the end of the day, is that it doesn't take a whole lot of hardware to really do this. You can invest in probably about $300 of some
Yeah.
pretty cool stuff. I mean, technically a flipper also falls under this category.
Yeah, you need a
But
$300 read write device, and then if it has the ability, to if your device is like the Flipper Zero and has the ability to then mimic that code, then great. But if you just have the read write device, you can also just throw that on your phone, and then you don't look suspicious carrying a Flipper Zero around to every door.
yeah, it's actually pretty simple. And the other one, the other big tool out there is called a Proxmarks. And so the idea is once you have one of these devices, reading these cards, just like the system at the front desk, becomes fairly trivial. And the information on there can be read out. In fact, there are even cases where you can use your own cell phone to read some of these
Yeah.
different types of cards, especially if they're supported with NFC or the frequencies that match NFC. And so you can read this data, you can write this data, you can clone this data. And then the more important part that Tristan, you were telling me about before the show is make sense of the data and build a further system around it, right?
Exactly. So what they were able to do is they found out that by taking one of these expired key cards, they could read the property code off the cards. That's a unique code for that property, and it's on every card, regardless of whether it's active or not. If it's for that hotel, and it has been written to by the hotel, then the property code is active in it. The second step that they had to take was to actually acquire one of Dormakaba's key card writing tools, and then the front desk software that Dormakaba sells for the hotels themselves to be able to do that. Now, that was something that they were like, okay, we've got to figure out how to do this. And when they were asked, this article comes to us from Wired, by the way. Is they were asked like, hey, how did you actually manage to do that? And they just said, we nicely asked a few people. Right. So specifically the quote from Mooters is, manufacturers assume that no one will sell their equipment on eBay and no one will make a copy of their software. And those assumptions, I think everyone knows, are not really valid. So they were able to just acquire what they needed. And when they did that, they were able to look at what data does that software actually write to the card as it is programming it, and reverse engineer that process and reverse engineer that data, so that they don't actually need to know what are the unique room identifiers for a card. Because once they had those two pieces of data, what's the property code off of an existing card, and what kind of data is written to that card through this software and like the format that it takes, they were able to write two cards for a property. The first card that they can write is essentially a programming key. So they will walk up to any lock in the hotel and tap it to the SafLok, and it reprograms the lock to accept the second key, which is just a blank master key that they've made. It doesn't need to have a unique room identifier on it. And then they can get into any of the rooms there. Now they've kept the actual like critical details about what exactly it is that they're writing back, but they disclosed this vulnerability to SafLok in 2022 when they found it. And the kind of disheartening thing about it is that since then, Dormakaba has been working on this and getting software updates out there, but they've disclosed that only 36% of locks have been updated at this point.
Yeah, we're starting to see a lot of different types of attacks like this across the market, with the fact that, like you said, I have definitely gone on eBay to get things that are generally for business and commercial purposes only, whether it's social engineering outfits for particular delivery companies, or yes, reading and writing software that's niche to different types of markets, including hospitality.
And we've talked before on the show a while ago, but we've talked before about the problem of not properly wiping hardware when you list it on eBay or throw it out, right? And that also leading to problems.
Yes, I have bought my fair share of Cisco switches that still have their running config on them from their previous owners. Shame on you, e-cyclers. but yeah, this really just goes to show the creativity and the level that an adversary is willing to go. And again, these guys were just a couple of people that are having fun doing some research and trying to discover what's going on in the different systems. Imagine if there were, bigger adversaries that had a lot bigger budgets and capabilities, they probably can get to this stuff maybe quicker, or if they're not already doing it today. So we're I don't even know where to go with this one. I'll tell you what, it's just really great research, and it's really cool to see that it's being disclosed and shown that these problems exist, and that a bigger security vulnerability could affect us in the real world and on our personal lives.
Well, and it's also important from an organizational security standpoint, right? Even if you're not a hotel, the fact that most offices these days use a badging system. Now, and those are going to be, probably sold for the purpose of security and hopefully be more secure than these lock systems are. But it is good to stay on top of these things and know that these things exist, because if your system is based on is an older, outdated system, is potentially based on this kind of tech, or if you're not using a system that is expressly built for keeping a building extremely secure, right? You're just using it as a badging system for employees. There's a lot of issues that could be present there, and you should be aware of the fact that, like, hey, these kinds of vulnerabilities exist where someone can, an employee's out at lunch and they take their lanyard off and put it on the table. Someone can walk by and scan that real quick and find out exactly what, the core details of those cards are. And then if they have access to the system itself that programmed that card, they might be able to make a master key card. I'm not trying to be, fear mongering here, but it's interesting to know this kind of vulnerability exists out there, and that you should be taking a look at it.
No, totally. One of the also fun, interesting details is you mentioned that it's not just hotels that use this. There's a lot of different places, right? And so that really starts to make you think about, from a risk perspective, is your business adding risk by utilizing systems that can be taken advantage with simple little bits of hardware and a little bit of know-how, and not having a more secure physical access system. But that does kind of help us bridge in a little bit to our next story, which is coming to us from the Hacker News regarding some malware that does target hardware.
Now, I let you do the deep dive into this one. One, because you found it, and two, because you love this stuff.
I know, I'm telling you, anything that gets just into the circuit board is really interesting to me. But this particular story comes to us, like I said, from the Hacker News, talking about a new upgraded version of malware called AcidPore. Now, you may not be necessarily familiar with this, but what's interesting about this is AcidPore is a variant of AcidRain, and AcidRain came out a couple of years ago to target different types of hardware and render them essentially inoperable. This was something that was seen heavily in Ukraine recently as part of their ongoing war right now. And what's interesting is that the original AcidRain was targeted what's called MIPS architecture. So these are the different types of systems that are embedded. Think things like your home consumer router or other types of embedded devices. IoT things often run MIPS. And so this malware targets these types of devices that are used in different types of government and military environments, things like modems and satellites. But it's since come back out onto the scene as AcidPore, targeting a lot more things in those environments, not just embedded systems, but closer to those conventional computers, stuff like networking devices, more IoT hardware that runs stuff like x86, RAID arrays, network attached storage devices, things that are mini Linux computers are now even being attacked. And so, this concept of what's old is now becoming new, and targeting and growing and expanding the capabilities is kind of what's being observed here, especially in some of these more targeted environments because of nation state attacks.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting with the nation state angle on this specifically, right? As a wiper, right? These are purely destructive pieces of malware. They are not necessarily designed for espionage or for theft or anything like that, right? AcidRain, other wipers like I think Shamoon was one that was in like the early 2010s, I think, was like sweeping across oil companies in the Middle East, like destroying hard disks. Like there's been a lot of malware like this, but it is purely a destructive piece of malware. And this new version, AcidPore, does have a lot of upgraded features that allow them to do a lot more than just that destructive activity. But from the state actor viewpoint, right? This is not the first time that we've seen incredibly powerful malware wielded by state actors. And the real problem with it is that this incredibly powerful malware is made, but then once it's out there, and it's no longer necessarily just a state actor problem. Now that this malware has been discovered being used by state actors and has been discovered in the wild, it's only a matter of time before we start seeing this deployed right by just your average hackers who are able to gain access to it and start using it. And I think that's actually that's something that we need to be extremely concerned about, right? Is as cyber warfare continues to escalate and state governments, including our own, right, are active in this cyber war and making these incredibly advanced pieces of malware that do these incredible things. To kind of jump out to the side for a little bit for a second here, right? When we talked about I think it was called the Newton atom, right, was like an incredibly powerful quantum computer that had been announced, and they were like, yeah, we've got the first one that's like this. And the running commentary at the time was like, if a public company has announced this, that means governments have had it for a long time, most likely. Right, these incredibly powerful pieces of malware are designed and then make their way out to the public. That means that they've already been in circulation and in use for an extremely long time by these state actors. And once it gets to the point that it's released and people can use it publicly and it's discovered, you no longer need to be the target of a state actor for this kind of thing to take effect. And when we've got things like the ongoing escalation of ransomware extortion, right, adding something like this to your ransomware package suddenly becomes very viable. An extremely powerful tool like this added to ransomware to say, we've encrypted your files, we've stolen your files, and we can release them all. If you don't pay us, we can also just go in and fully destroy the hard drives that we have access to. So it doesn't matter if a decryptor is ever released for us. That is an incredibly frightening concept.
Yeah, as you mentioned, right, these concepts of wipers just make kind of the scenario a little bit worse, right? It is pure destruction that's trying to happen here. There are some new features that were released as part of AcidPore, things that are going to allow it to do some more functionality on the system itself, because it is more or less a Linux box. But yeah, from its roots being a wiper, this kind of only has one thing, and they're still researching whether or not it's part of a current campaign that's happening, but it is being monitored very closely. But we are down to the last couple minutes. I know there is a big story that also happened this week that focuses around privacy. That we wanted to try to touch on here. And I'll tell you what, Tristan, if you want to round us out on this one, because you really dug into it, and it upset all of us a little bit.
It upset all of us a little bit, but recently producer Ben and I have actually been working with our data security and data privacy teams on some new services that are coming out from GuidePoint. So we both cared about this one a lot when we saw it. But specifically, GlassDoor recently made some acquisitions that have changed the way that they are handling profile information. And this story came from Ars Technica, and it is about a woman who they are giving the moniker of Monica to protect her privacy. But she realized that she had sent in a support ticket to GlassDoor to have some information removed from her profile, and that once she did that, the support team had taken her real name that was provided in the email and added it to her GlassDoor profile, which is something she did not want because she has left reviews for her employers on the site before. Now, whether those reviews were positive or negative isn't really covered, but I don't think it really matters because something that you view as neutral could be viewed as negative by your company. Right? Or you could just leave an honest review and say this one manager that we had was just not great, but the rest of the company was awesome. But it opens the door once your name is out there for a lot of bad things to happen. So they added her name to the profile, and when she dug into it and escalated her case, it turns out that when GlassDoor bought the social media app Fishbowl, which required that you have your name and employer tied to your profile, that then became a requirement of GlassDoor profiles. And so they have been adding that using various different things like scraping resumes, support email tickets that come in, asking you to add it yourself, finding other ways to add that to your profile. And while they say that the reviews will remain anonymous, what this does is that vastly increases their database and the information that they're storing and makes them a much larger target for hackers. And as Monica, who is within the tech and security field, points out, it is now in the database, and all it takes is one bug in an update to their software that causes a misappropriated join, and suddenly your name is on every review that you've ever left. And that can be used and found by employers. Glassdoor as an anonymous site was one of kind of the last ways that employees had to blow the whistle, right, on bad behavior at companies without potentially risking their own careers or risking any kind of negative repercussions for things that were really, really terrible happening there. There's a couple companies. I'm very heavily involved in the nerd space, right? I think we all are, but specifically within gaming. And I did some moonlighting for some gaming companies. There were things that came out about companies that were very large in the gaming space, and they came out through Glassdoor reviews and people saying like, yeah, there's a real culture here that is a problem. And it's such a problem that we don't feel we can speak about it publicly. So this sudden push to have your name there is bad, I think, on a lot of fronts. And what specifically she found as she was speaking with customer service, and it got escalated to management, and she told them explicitly, I don't consent to having this information on my profile. They said then the only way to get rid of it is for you to delete it. Either you have it there or you don't have a profile. And specifically the manager told her, sorry, we disagree on this issue, but we treat all users equally. And so we require that this information be there. Now, this is from a security standpoint, right? The reason that the story is important is because when you are a company and you are requiring identifiable information to be put into, a digital asset, whether that be a profile or anything else, you are now responsible for that person's personal security. You are opening the door to that. And so if you are not, going through proper data security and data governance to make sure that you're protecting that PII, not only are there a host of regulations around the world now that you fall subject to, but you're also opening yourself up to personal liability if you are not properly storing, processing, culling that data on a regular basis. So it's something to think about from an organizational perspective, right? As you are expanding services, what data do you actually need to collect and store, and what are you opening yourself up to by that? We are 3 minutes over, but that's fine. I love going over with you. I love going over with you, Jonathan. It's a great time. We wouldn't go over if we weren't having good conversation.
All right. Well, we can definitely round out then from here. We appreciate everybody tuning in live, or if you're watching this in the future, we love your comments. We do read them all. We love also the interactivity during the show. So feel free to reach out to us. Don't ever hesitate to chime in. This has been the week of GPS Live for March 22nd, 2024. And with that, I'm not going to say it. I'll let you start it.
I'm also out. I have been in Mocha TV, Tristan Morris. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week for the actual end of the month.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.